During the late 19th century, Buck, an enormous delicate St. Bernard, lives happily with his lord, Judge Mill Operator, in St. Nic Clara, California. Buck lives on a palatial home in the central area U.S. He is ungainly, ruined, horrendous and, in particular, defiant. In the wake of eating all the food at a party held by his lord Judge Mill Operator, he is compelled to rest outside as discipline. While there, he is snatched by a cheat canine to brokers. The merchants transport Buck up to the frozen north to sell him as a sled canine. While at the Alaskan port, Buck goes over John Thornton interestingly and returns John's harmonica to him after it drops out of his pocket. He is then offered to a man named Perot, who works for the postal assistance. Perot and his significant other Francois add Buck to their canine sled group that transports them across the Alaskan wild to convey the mail. At first, Buck is awkward and overpowered. The head of the sled canines, Spitz, is awful to Buck and the other canines. In any case, Buck before long begins partaking in his new life and starts reaching out to his wild wolf-like soul, depicted as a monster dark wolf. Buck acquires the blessing of the other sled canines by treating them sympathetic and charms himself to his new bosses when he saves Francois after she falls through the ice of a frozen lake. Spitz chooses to go after Buck to restore his administration, yet Buck completely embraces his wild side and loses Spitz. Spitz strays into the wild, shamed by his loss. Buck accepts his situation as the top of the sled canines and gets Perot and Francois to make their very first on-time conveyance. The last stop is the town where John resides. Buck defers their takeoff long enough for John to hand a letter to his better half to Perot. Despite the fact that Buck cherishes his new bosses and his bunch of canines, Perot and Francois are excused when their administrations are supplanted by the message. They are compelled to sell their canines prior to getting back to Canada. The canines are offered to a savage man named Hal. Hal and his companions Mercedes and Charles mean to go into the wild and make their fortune viewing his gold. Clearly they are totally not ready for the afflictions of living in the wild. John attempts to convince them not to withdraw. However, Hal and his companions take off. Understanding that late spring is coming sooner than anticipated, which will deliver the sled canines pointless over the non-frigid landscape, John tracks them trying to persuade them to turn around. At the point when he gets up to speed to them, he finds Buck having blacked out and the other canines malnourished. He can't prevent Hal and his countrymen from leaving their process, however is permitted to return Buck to town with him. Buck recovers and John's set of experiences is uncovered. His child passed on early on and he and his significant other became separated. To get away from his misery, John ventured to gold country and oftentimes drinks his distresses away. In a little while Hal staggers once more into town, finds John savoring a bar, and punches him. Hal blames John for attacking him, saying he is seen as no gold and lost every one of his canines in the wild. The residents toss Hal out of the bar after Buck jumps in to safeguard John, his new expert. At home, Buck covers John's liquor in the snow. Subsequent to recovering mentally, John lets Buck know that he came to the frozen north since his child was fixated on visiting gold country and traveling to an unknown piece of the state. Presently clear-headed and having a buddy in Buck, John chooses to branch out into the strange domain to pay tribute to his child. He and Buck endure a perilous kayak excursion to the wild. They track down a long deserted lodge and choose to remain there. In the interim, Hal discovers that John and Buck have withdrawn and starts to follow them. John finds that the stream close to his lodge is loaded with gold and starts panning it. Buck sees a female white wolf in the forest and starts following her. Buck ultimately saves one of the pack individuals from suffocating and the pack starts regarding Buck as one of his own. In spite of the fact that Buck goes the entire day with the wolves, he returns consistently to remain with John. In the interim, John discovers a lasting sense of harmony for his tormented soul and concludes he needs to get back to his home and attempt and rescue his previous lifestyle. He likewise understands that Buck has tracked down his actual home with the wolves. On John's last evening in the wild, Hal shows up and stands up to him with a stacked rifle. The two battle for it until Hal figures out how to shoot John and afterward requests the gold. John gives all the gold he had gathered to Hal, however Hal will not be fulfilled until both John and Buck are dead. Buck, who had gone off with the wolf pack that evening, hears shots and surges back to John. Hal attempted to scare Buck with the club, yet the canine defeats his trepidation and snatches the club away from Hal. Buck then, at that point, drives Hal into the consuming lodge, which speedily implodes on top of him. Buck goes to set up a mortally injured John. He gets one final gander at the knoll with Buck prior to surrendering to his injury. In portrayal, John lets the crowd know that Buck has since turned into a legend. He has become head of the wolf pack and has young doggies with the white wolf. In any case, he guarantees the crowd that Buck is a genuine canine. Buck at times elapses the consumed lodge and recalls his companion. Also, despite the fact that John trusts that he had the option to show Buck love, He realizes that Buck has genuinely tracked down Joy when he paid attention to Call of the Wild. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notification and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching, see you in the next one.